In contexts where no durable external medium existed for storing extended procedural sequences, the stability of rule systems depended on successive generations reproducing those sequences through human memory without external support. Each reproduction occurred without an independent reference against which accuracy could be checked. Alterations introduced at any point carried the potential to propagate forward, because the system possessed no capacity for versioning, no external archive for recovery, and no mechanism for restoring an earlier state once a change had been accepted. A single accepted alteration replaced its predecessor without trace. The transmission chain therefore operated under conditions of irreversible substitution. Whatever form the material took at each stage became the only version available to the next. This is before logic, a history of rules before they were written. Techniques for addressing this constraint took different forms according to the degree of invariance required. In the Vedic corpus, the same phonetic material was maintained through multiple interlocking recitational analyses. The continuous flow was supplemented by word-by-word isolation that exposed boundaries otherwise obscured by combination, and by overlapping pairwise and zigzag sequences that generated independent pathways through identical content. Each pathway presupposed the others. A deviation registered immediately as misalignment across the set. Correction could then restore agreement by reference to the shared phonetic and grammatical regularities that all versions presupposed. This arrangement made small discrepancies visible and correctable within the act of transmission itself. It reduced dependence on the accuracy of any single reciter and distributed the maintenance of fidelity across the trained community. In the Greek epic tradition, the requirement was not verbatim invariance, but the preservation of underlying relations and sequences. Performers drew upon a shared repertoire of metrically fitted phrases and recurrent configurations. These units could be selected and recombined during performance, while remaining consistent with prior realizations of the same material. The resulting versions could differ in local detail without disrupting the network of obligations, causes, and consequences that connected events. Internal evidence from the surviving texts shows densities of formulaic language consistent with constrained recomposition rather than fixed scripts committed to memory. This mechanism permitted controlled variation around stable structural cores. It did not eliminate deviation. It limited deviation to forms that did not fracture the transmitted relations. These organizational features depended on institutional conditions that could sustain both training and repeated verification. Apprenticeship under established practitioners allowed errors to be identified and corrected before they entered wider circulation. Public and ceremonial performance created occasions at which multiple participants could register discrepancies against their own knowledge of prior versions. In legal adjudication, the oral statement of applicable norms during proceedings generated recurrent tests of fidelity, because any alteration that changed the determination of rights or duties could be contested on the spot by other knowledgeable parties. In observational domains, the periodic application of transmitted procedures against recurring natural phenomena supplied external points against which internal consistency could be measured. The effectiveness of verification varied with the density of these occasions relative to the rate at which variation could accumulate. Dense, overlapping networks reduce the scope for undetected drift. Narrow or isolated chains increased it. At the same time, only distinctions and relations that could be encoded in rhythmic, contrastive, or sequential forms survived without rapid degradation. This filter operated continuously on the content that could be maintained as part of the active tradition. The degree of invariance actually achieved cannot be measured directly from periods before written records appear. Most surviving evidence consists of texts transcribed after oral and written modes had already begun to interact, which makes it difficult to separate the stabilizing effects of oral mechanisms from the regularizing effects introduced during fixation in script. Comparative examination of documented oral traditions shows that high consistency in core content is attainable under conditions of rigorous training and frequent cross-verification, while peripheral elements and less tightly integrated material exhibit greater variability. Traditions serving ritual or legal functions, where exact wording carried operational consequences, developed stronger internal checks. Traditions serving primarily narrative or genealogical functions permitted more variation in detail, provided the core relations remained intact. These functional differences produced corresponding differences in achieved fidelity. The record does not permit precise quantification, nor confident separation of oral stability from later editorial activity. The introduction of writing did not replace oral transmission with an independent storage layer. Written records often functioned initially as memory aids or reference points consulted during oral instruction and verification. This produced extended periods in which the organizational features required for oral stability, formulaic phrasing, explicit sequencing, hierarchical classification, continued to shape the form of written corpora. Early written works in logic and classification therefore encountered a body of distinctions and procedures that had already been compressed, sequenced, and stabilized under the constraints of transmission without external storage. Formal analysis began from material already organized according to the requirements of memorability and institutional verification rather than from unstructured accumulation. The hybrid phase transferred functions to script while preserving continuity in transmissible content and organization. Early formal reasoning thus operated on a substrate already shaped by the demands of preservation under conditions of irreversible substitution and limited verification density. In the next episode, we will examine comparative logical traditions,